Beautiful. Good morning in Melbourne, Australia. It's winter and it is freezing. I know I said this at the beginning of Riley's message, but it's like 2 degrees here now. This is really cold. So that's why I'm rugged up. And I've got Anne here from the United States. Yeah,
Is it a tank because it's 102 here?
right. And here we are. We're having another conversation about life after landmark. And I know we have really touched on these distinctions very powerfully yet. However, I think it's really important to get the background of who we are, how we kind of look into different situations. And now we're ready to have a look at, well, what was your life before landmark compared to when you left? Yeah, so I think we can start. And the way out, I think that's really, really important because that's something that came to me afterwards, was if I walk into a building, one of the first things that standards that the safety office will go through is this is the exit. We need to know how to get out of a building. Otherwise, it's a trap. We're walking into something where we can't find the way out. And that is what landmark's like. It's like we get pulled in, but nobody knows where the exit is. And this is now, it seems, what you're really developing with your after landmark business. So that's what I'd love to speak
Yeah.
about. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Dale. And my book, I wrote my book honestly for the graduates. I wrote my book for one of the things in the process that working with my publisher, who's a absolutely brilliant, brilliant woman, and her whole team is stunning. But one of the things they have you do is sort of actually write like a love letter to your ideal reader. And they have you write like a bio of who is your ideal reader. And I, as I was doing that process, I actually had several people in mind, but I realized also it was myself. And my ideal reader is somebody who is kind of gotten shaken up by new information and the kind of information that has you reevaluate and have to look back. I mean, if you're conscious at all, like it forces you, you either can go more, you could go unconscious, or you have to look. That's the choice. And for me, like my ideal reader was the person who was kind of like, oh, I think I want to look. I think, do I want to look? Is it safe to look? If I look, will I lose myself, who I become that I love? I love who I became as it throughout my 20, what is it, 26 years or 25 years, whatever, that I participated in. I call it the WWW, Wacky World of Werner. So includes Landmark, because I spent the last 10 years working in this project with Werner, as I share in the book. But so Dale, I love that you're bringing that up, because that was my ideal reader. That was like, dear reader, like, I don't know. What was I a part of? What was happening? Was what I felt real? Was that real? Like all those questions. And that's what my book is, my story of going through those questions for myself. And I'm still asking some of them. I mean, because since the book has come out, I've gotten flooded with way more information, new information that's having me reevaluate again at a deeper level. And yeah, and that's a challenging process. It really is. It really is.
Well, with the questions come answers. And if
Yes.
nobody's
And
asking,
more questions.
yeah, that's right. And if nobody's asking the questions, particularly publicly, then no answers come back. And this is, the thing with Landmark is they're not asking these questions. What is life like for you after
They're
Landmark?
actually actively suppressing
Yeah.
only the asking of the questions, but the people, it's not,
Yes.
I'm not the first one to speak up. I'm not even the first one to talk publicly about Werner's abuse. There was a whole 60-minute special about it. There was a book about it. There's like, it's not new. It was new to me because I came into Landmark post Werner. I came in 1995. Werner left in 1990. The company was formulated in 1991. And I came in an era where they were completely had erased him, totally. And I remember my ex-husband, who literally, for those that have read my book will know this because I kind of tell the story, but I do the forum to save my marriage. And I get clear in the forum that I should not be in that marriage. And he had told me prior to doing the forum that, I'm going to leave you. And, he's going to leave me with my son and my daughter. And honestly, the whole sort of fantasy life that I had developed about having made it and, was crumbling. And so I did the Landmark Forum, and then during the forum and the marriage counseling session after it, I'm like, well, I think, yeah, that was probably a good idea for us to go ahead and separate. And anyway, then he lost his bananas. I mean, he just totally went bananas on the whole thing. And then he literally eventually tried to hire a cult expert to get me deprogrammed and all kinds of stuff. And he tried to use it to get custody of my daughter and all kinds of stuff. And he used to scream, he would call like, do you know, it was formulated by this used car salesman that lost his family. And I said, look, yes, the ideas were foundational and the employees bought it. I mean, I had the corporate Q&A, like, the employees bought it. He doesn't have anything to do with it. Honestly, I look back now and this even sounds silly because it's his brother and sister who run it. So like, did he really? But, and I've now since learned that he, while that is in the strictest sense of the word true, he never stopped being involved. And it's a family affair. It's a family affair. It's like, and I was so proud that at a certain point I was part of the family, and anyway, but watch out for what you get. What is that saying about that pride comes before the fall, something like that.
So I'm curious though, have you been in contact with your ex-husband since?
He passed away, actually. He passed away in 2020. Mm-hmm.
So you didn't get to have these conversations with him?
He was quite unwell. I would not have anyway, because he was very, I would come, he was part of why I was like, yes, see why I hadn't wanted to look. He was abusing my son, he was doing drugs, and he was sleeping with other women. And I was not seeing that. I was just not seeing that, because to see that meant, one, that the illusion I had created about my own success would be a lie, and I'd have to confront that. And I didn't feel safe to be on my own and take care of my children on my own.
And also there's whatever comes from the mouth of somebody like that is already like, you don't know. It's like, I know for myself, it's like, well, you're not quite got it together enough to be able to give me advice. Yeah.
So, and, he was a good man. I mean, much later, as I would come to, particularly as I walked through my daughter has complex PTSD. And so the last 10 years or so, I've really learned, I've got a little, experiential, and studied a lot and taken a lot of classes in trauma. And now I can look back and recognize that he was traumatized. And I do know he did talk about being beat up by his stepfather when he was a kid and trying to protect his brother and sister and all this stuff. And at the time I was like, wow, look at you, survivor, you survived all that. I didn't understand trauma the way I do now. So that trauma lived in him, but he didn't have trauma care or recovery at that time. He had alcohol and cocaine. Mm-hmm. So, this is the 1980s and 1990s. So, it was a very, very, very different time. And in fact, he had a bit of a psychological break in the Landmark Forum when we did it. Because he, I would come to understand he most likely, as an impact of his trauma, had some degree of bipolar disorder, things of that nature. So it didn't go over well for him, because people who have, I don't like to call those mental disorders. I now think of it as neurodivergence. I don't like classifying it as a disorder or whatnot. Personally, I don't feel like that. But if your, mental health issues should not be addressed in the forum, in Landmark's programs. And we are taught that as leaders, and we are taught that as staff. And we have there's pretty rigorous policies regarding that. And leaders and staff break those policies all the time, because the pressure, whether they need,
if they need somebody in, like if it's Friday 3 p.m. was when the stats were drawn. Yep. Okay, well, who can we pull? Who's kind of on the edge here? We could risk.
Well, and you are kind of, and it is quite, I mean, somebody told me this was said in a forum less than 2 months ago. She called me to tell me she'd read my book and then did the forum, actually. And then I was like, what was that like? But this person was telling me somebody had this giant discovery of a traumatic issue in the forum, which is something that happens. That definitely happens. And the person sharing the story with me was kind of appalled that there wasn't, she wasn't directed towards ongoing support for that. I often describe the forum as a kind of can opener. It opens a can, but if you're going to open a can, you better at least have some level of care for what comes out, right? So, and they don't. And but she said, even in that situation, the leader said to her, this was 2 months ago, well, you can do therapy for 30 years, or you can do the advanced course, and in 4 days you can get that resolved. So quite often the landmark programs, so that's a double bind, that's contrary, right? So you get this form that says, if you have these mental kind of bipolar disorder, if you have, we highly, we recommend you not do the forum, consult with your mental health professional, which is very accurate and very responsible. But then you have leaders on the stage in a group environment where people are kind of put into a hypomania state. And then you say, but you can get that worked out in the forum. You can get that worked out in the advanced course. And that is blatantly not true. And you can get some great stuff in the forum in the advanced course, but you're not going to get the source. You're not going to get over a mental, particularly a traumatic issue. It's not, it can open that up, but it's not the appropriate place to then digest and process that. That needs to be done in a, psychotherapy environment with somebody who's trained.
And one-on-one as well, rather than having the whole group. Good, yeah. So I want to just come back to the ex-husband, who you were then, versus how would you work with somebody like that now? I mean, it's very possible that you would never get yourself involved with somebody like that now, but what would be the warning signs? What now?
It's so funny. So to me, my book I mean, in a way, how I would do it now is I would write a book about it. I would get out, I would get support. I have, I always jokingly say I work with a spiritual teacher, a therapist, and a coach, a shamanist coach that I adore, and process. I wouldn't avoid what I was seeing. That's not true, actually, because I did avoid what I was seeing in Landmark a lot for a long time. I went by a lot of red flags. I didn't know they were red flags. I share even in the book about the staff around Werner being particularly discombobulated and like, ooh, and just asking the same dumb questions over and over and just seeming very out of mind and out of body, disembodied. And at the time I said, oh, they're being so confronted because they're being called to be their highest self in a rigorous and aggressive manner, which I didn't agree with. I even had told Werner at one point, I think you create a hostile work environment. I would never work in that. But if those people agreed to that, I now know you can't agree to be abused, verbal abuse included. Look up abuse in the I had to look up and learn what was abuse. And when I did, I was shocked because I was like, I was seeing a lot of abuse. Verbal abuse for sure. So, but now, to me, we can't do anything about what we don't see until we see it. Then when we see it, that's sort of a measure, to me, that's a measure of who we are, is how we react once we see what we hadn't seen before, or once we know what we hadn't known before. I have all the grace and forgiveness and heart in the world for people who are unconsciously and unawarely supporting exploitive and abusive situations. I have compassion for that because I did it. But it took me 2.5 years of work with professionals to get to the place where I could say that, and say that with love and forgiveness for myself and for anybody else. And that's in the end ultimately why I wrote the book, because I know that these secrets are coming. You can't be in the age that we're in now, in the environment that we're in now, the internet and all of that, and these secrets are not coming out. And since I wrote the book, I've seen that I was only aware of a tiny tip of the secrets. And, I have on a daily basis, I hear from at least 2 people pretty much now, with some wanting to tell me a story of abuse or exploitation or mental break or whatnot that they experienced. And they're confused because they also experienced value, or what they thought was valuable. And they're trying to sort that out. That's what my book was about. So what would I do now? I would, as soon as I know, I'd be calling up all the great professionals I have in my address book, and I'd be sorting through it. I had a small handful of friends that I felt I could maybe talk about it with, including a man who was my forum leader, who's a good friend. And, he's been really invaluable to me as I work to understand, like, wait, what happened? What did I miss? Why did I not see? It's the exact same questions that I didn't actually, that's not true. I didn't ask those questions. Once I found out and figured out who my ex-husband was, that he was really doing drugs. Like, once I acknowledged that to myself, I got to safety, which is what you do. I kicked him out. I ended up having to get a restraining order because he reacted violently to being asked to move out. But I got to safety and I got help. I got support. It was actually a wonderful police officer that handed me a pamphlet and gave me access to resources to then start to understand what was happening, why he was threatening me, why, like, all this stuff. But that doesn't mean I didn't live for many years without a lot of evidence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it does. It's the classic signs of abuse.
Yeah. But I never did go. And so I went into landmark programs, and I never understood my codependency.
Right.
I never understood, I didn't. Often I say, somebody has asked me in an interview, what do you think is the most damaging aspect of landmark? And I said, I don't, setting aside people who experience physical violence, verbal assault, and abuse, which is definitely there in spades. Okay, so that's incredibly damaging. People who experience mental and psychological breaks, damaging. But for the many of us who went through and didn't directly experience those things, the most damaging aspect is what we didn't do because we were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing that, when you're participating in a high control group, and in an LGAT trainings, which is a whole component to that, you're not doing anything else. They don't even have to tell you not to do anything else. Although when you become a leader in landmark, you are told you can't do anything else. I mean, you can go to your church if you go to a conventional church, but you're never going to do it because you're working 100 hours a week. So, it's not going to happen. So you stop participating in your family, you stop participating in everything because you literally just don't have bandwidth for it. And it's not, I heard a story yesterday of somebody there in Australia who's was on staff, and they had a family member died. And in their tradition, there's a week-long worth of ceremony that that you do as you come together as a family, and that you do as an indigenous tradition. And this person was told on no uncertain terms they absolutely could not have a week off to do that. And if they did, they would be fired. And I mean, there was huge consequences. So they had to choose between being a part of that family ritual and tradition and being a staff member. And you hear that story over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really disheartening. But anyway, I forgot what I was answering.
Choice. Chocolate or vanilla, choose. So coming back to the codependency, was there anything within Landmark that really stuck out for you? So if you look at who you were before you went in, and now who you are, like, were there any pivotal moments where you realized being codependent on your ex-husband was altering who you are, and you had a choice that you could actually start to make?
I didn't get the codependency thing till about a year ago. So, and what I saw was in relationship, well, it was all over in my life and my relationships, but it was also in my relationship with Landmark. I mean, of course I loved Landmark because Landmark is perfect for a codependent person. So, and especially a codependent person whose core conversation from childhood, from the moment I helped my mother, who had been sort of imprisoned in her room for 3 days and raped repeatedly by my stepfather. And she gets out and she comes and gets my sister and I. I'm 5 years old, my sister's 3. And it's early in the morning, and we're watching Saturday morning cartoons. And she comes and gets us, and she's all bloody and beaten up. And she says, we have to go. And so we go out the back door, and we run down the alley, and we knock on doors until somebody answers. Now, in a 5-year-old's brain, I'm saving my mother. I'm saving my mother. We're saving mom. And we did. And she got away, and we went and stayed with some relatives for a month or so while she healed. And then, we, lived with my mother, who, by the way, did not get in any kind of relationship again until I was basically, I was out of the house. Now, I left the house when I was 15. So 10 years. But that in Landmark, I did see that conversation, you know, that being a helper, that being somebody who stands for a world that works for everyone and nothing left out, like it aided and abetted that belief system. It gave me a place to exercise, to express that belief system. It didn't unwind it, it wound it. It wasn't until I was doing my spiritual work with the Ridwan School and work with it in a session with a teacher about 5 years ago that I saw my entire life. And I used to teach a distinction that was about this, the core conversation that you spend your life proving or disproving, thereby reifying it. But I'd kind of seen it, but not like this. And then I saw in this at the Ridwan School in this work that my entire life had been about saving people or they'll die. And I was at the moment I was, you know, walking beside my daughter as she was going through suicidal ideation. I had other relationships. I had taken in a homeless person. You know, my life. So Landmark was a place for me to express that codependency. It was not a place to unwind it. And I think that's true. And then I literally ended up buying Codependent No More, which I'm pretty sure I'd read way back in my 20s. And I'm going through the book and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is me, you know? But that was part of unwinding that, but that was post Landmark. But that's what I mean. Like there's deep work, you know, and it comes to you to do it when you do it, and you do it with whatever tool you're participating with in that moment. And I mean, honestly, I got a lot of value. There's a lot of other things I got valuable in my, you know, before Landmark, I never looked somebody in the face when I talked to them. I never thought, what? I didn't even talk. Now I'm like a public speaker and a teacher and a trainer. Like, oh my God, what a blessing that was. But here's what I now know. It may not have looked exactly like that, but I'm me. I'm the source of the results I got in Landmark, not Landmark. I happen to be at Landmark. I appreciate Landmark and its work. But Landmark, because of its sales model particularly, and because of its, honestly, its foundation, that its EST foundation, works very hard to leave you with that Landmark, the work, the distinctions, the organization, the community, that's the source of the value that you're getting. And what I'm saying, where I got to, and I share in the book, is no, that's the misappropriation. You are the source. And you may have used this tool to support your growth and development, your evolution. Good on you. But don't turn the source of it, the identity of it, over to something external to yourself. That's what I'm learning at 55.
Yeah, there's external authority versus the inner authority. We lose trust in our inner authority and hand it over on a platter to an external authority that we think has the answers and can make our lives better. That's what I've since learned. But something really interesting came to me when you were talking about seeing your mother having been raped. And you see the damage, like the blood. It's like, this is bad. That's like, in knowing up until then, there's something happening, but it's like, there's this point. It's like, this is bad now. Right. This is when I need to act. And also the codependency and addiction. I suspect that with Landmark creating the environment for people to come and talk about these things that we know are bad, we know are wrong. But there's this point where we're like, we have to do something about it. So providing a space for people to talk about that, then it's kind of like, we got you.
Yeah,
now,
it's equivalent to confession.
Yeah, they're like it.
Collateral, you hear about collateral in other organizations. So it's one of the tenets of an LGAT. So one of the things that makes a large group awareness training, which is a particular kind of training, that's now, thank you, Dr. John Hunter, studying it brilliantly and really identifying, but that's one of the tenets that makes it a large group awareness training that could be potentially psychologically dangerous, is that it has this confessional component to it.
And that opens up the vulnerabilities of people
Yeah.
And it's a comment I saw yesterday, or a little video I saw on X yesterday, was a woman talking about what's the difference between a dealer and a healer. A dealer doesn't give you a solution, right? A healer offers a way out. It comes back to the exit.
Yeah.
Landmark in a way like dealers. They're like, okay, great, we've got somebody that we can hook
They are.
in,
They're dealers
because there's no exit.
they're dealers of dopamine. That's
Right.
literally, that's what I'm learning. Now, look, I love me a great dopamine hit. I mean, I wouldn't say, I can say with certainty that I will never do a landmark program under its current iteration. You know, there is some potentiality if, you know, somebody of integrity took over the organization and made the kinds of changes, I would possibly consider it. I don't, but see, I would now know what I was in. I would now know, like, okay, one of the things going to happen in this program is I'm going to be taken way down, you know, into like to look at things that are uncomfortable and may be hurtful and I'm going to be taken down psychologically, mentally, so forth. And then I'm going to be brought way up. I know what that looks like now. Now, honestly, if I liked that, which I don't so much for the record, I could also go skiing, or I could go jump out of an airplane, or I could go, you know, all these kinds of things. But that is what happens in a large group awareness training, is they take you down, usually through some kind of a confessional sort of process, and then in a bit of a beating. And if you watch any of the, I just watched the Transformation, the Life and Legacy of Werner Erhard, Robin Simon's movie, which I'm sure I saw when it came out, which was like 2006 or something. But it was really interesting watching it from what I now know now about mental health and trauma and informed consent and da 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 da. And I've been studying Est. I have on my desk the, you know, the book of Est, and you know, now I'm studying the foundation of the house that I lived in for 26 years. And the foundation has everything to do with the house. Even if you change the furniture and the drapes and the decor, it's still built in that footstep. And as I'm understanding it now, I now get that. And I don't know if I would ever choose that. I wouldn't choose it with this exact organization, mostly because I can't condone the hurt that they've caused and been unaccountable for. But you know, I don't know, maybe. Would I sign up for something that I know takes my brain, you know, probably. I used to love finding out I was an asshole and my life didn't work. Like, how great was that? It's really only through spiritual work that I've come to see, like, oh, wait, I don't have to be an asshole in order to get the goods. I can get the goods without having to be an asshole. And that's what Landmark doesn't now understand. If they took that whole part out of their work and they actually just delivered the ideas and updated them to what we know now, I think they could actually, you know, potentially be great. I don't know. We'd have to try it out and see.
I've got to share something about that, because so there's two things. One is the dopamine hit, like the skiing, you get a quick rush, right?
Quick, yeah.
Yeah. And then when you go home,
Like, it's yeah, only like an hour. Yeah.
Whereas with what Landmark offers, it's kind of getting into the deep roots of behavior that offer a potential permanent change. Now, here's what I find interesting, because it's like you get access into I found for myself, and bring it into the personal front, I found for myself that I was, okay, I'll go back to I'll share the story. So we sat in one of the meetings for a communication, access to power, creation meeting. So before each event, there's a creation meeting. You meet with a leader, we create invent a possibility. Each and every person will leave this course knowing the true access to themselves and be free forever, or whatever. You know, we create something that had a kind of more, rather than the quick dopamine hit, it was a potential of something completely life-altering. So this forum leader, this communication course leader came.
But the dopamine hit for the person creating it. Don't step over that.
Right.
It's okay. The dopamine hit for the people who are creating it. That's a high to take the case that you even have the power to do that as a godlike power. And there's a high in that.
Yeah.
There's literally a dopamine high in saying the possibility that life works for everyone on the planet. Like, you're psyching yourself up.
Yes.
But you can't you ultimately have no dominion over that. So you'll come down because at some point that high is going to meet reality, and you can't
Well, it's
actually.
kind of the tagline though is provided you do more courses with us for the term of your natural life, we'll support that. It's like that's the tagline that does the unspoken part that
And
doesn't.
then you can do the courses that tell you that you have to take actions consistent
Yes,
with that. Here's a
that's
planner
right.
for how to do that, and da 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 da. Yeah, exactly.
It's actually used again to us like, oh, so you're the possibility of energy. Well, this course will provide more energy for you for that. So
That's
that's
the exploitation. By the way,
right.
people say like, "What do you mean exploitation?" That is exploitation right there. That's that right there.
So this communication course later is like, we had to get into our inner asshole. What was it like that we really hated about ourselves, and to come back the next day with some kind of answer. So he was like, this dopamine hit for him. He's like, I'm going to get you to have a look at yourself, the areas that you don't like. I'm like, okay, cool. So I went home, and prior to that, I'd traveled around Europe for 6 months. And I loved learning new languages and sitting around people that would sit at a table and speak this language that I had no idea, but I'd try to guess what they were talking about, the way they reached for the salt, pepper, or whatever. I'd learn these key little words. But so I need to say a rude word. So one of the things that always stuck out for me was the word CUNT. I could always pick it if somebody said it, right? And
See
then
you in tea like the afternoon tea. Is that what you said?
yes. No,
Okay. That's
the
what
word.
as Americans we don't do tea, but I'm
No, no,
British
no,
by.
no, no, no. I'm saying something very different. The word that stuck out for me was CUNT, that word.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Right. So when I went home to have a look at my inner asshole, the inner asshole just didn't work for me. I was
Mm.
like, and then something came to me. I remember sitting up in bed. And it's like, I'm not an asshole. I'm a CUNT.
And tea. Which
Yeah.
can we be clear in British parlance, that's not as bad of a word. In the American world, that's like the worst thing you can call somebody. But
Yeah.
as
Well,
I understand in British speak, that's not. It's like asshole. It's like
well,
yeah, that's funny.
kind of, sort of. It still is a little bit worse than an
Well, but
asshole.
yeah.
And
Well,
that's what got me. It's like, I'm not an asshole. There's something underneath there. And it's like, okay, that's what I am. So the next morning, I was so excited. I was like, life made sense for me. It was like, I've always got one better than other people. I've always got like a story or it's something I can get right underneath it. And so I was like, I'm so excited. And I went to him before. So we met just before he went, I had to share this new revelation. So as he was about to walk up to the front of the room, I'm like, run in. I've got everything ready, all the chairs, all the participants in there, all the forms are done, everything. And I whispered in his ear, I said, I'm not an asshole. I worked it out. I'm a CUNT. And he just looked at me. He's like, the timing. And then he walked to the front of the room and he turned around. He's like, hi, so I'm da da da, and this is the course. And I'm like, I feel so good. It's like, this is going to be a great course for people.
What do they say? Confession is good for the soul, right? Like, so, patriarchal, dominant structures and systems have been using the power of confession.
Yes.
You don't even have to confess to something that's real. You can confess to something that's not even real and you get the high. Like
Mm.
they've done studies on this now. Like you can see it. It lights up the pleasure center of the brain, this confession thing. That's why you're not going to find a high control group of any level that doesn't have that component. They'll all have that component. They'll have some kind of confessional component
And in a
because
group setting,
naturally high.
yeah, and in a group setting, it's even more powerful because you've got all of these witnesses, right? You've
Yep.
got all these people that have bore witness to this confession. And
Yes.
generally, the confession is done one-on-one in a quiet little room, with a curtain in between. You can't even see the face. So
Yes.
Landmark have, if you like, exploited the confession to such a degree that it's the impact on everybody in the room. And there's also the one agreement when we go in that we won't share the information, that we won't say names,
Yes.
we'll keep everything private. So it's like the room, this tiny little room gets really big.
Well,
and we
and
can see each other's faces, and
it's so good, Dale, because remember when we led introductions and we would talk about, well, the power of it is the group dynamic. You don't even have to say anything and your life will transform. Your life's not transforming. You're watching some person, I'll never forget the gal in my forum. I don't remember her particularly, but I remember her story about rape and, being raped. And then my forum leader walking her through her rape story 2, 3, 4 times until it didn't have the charge, which is a therapeutic actually method that is now under, there's a big controversy, there's therapists, people of the therapeutic community that say that's healthy. There's people that say it's not. But in this case, it made a big difference. I never said a word in my forum, but I'm sitting there I'm confessing to myself. I'm
yeah.
calling my best girlfriend who invited me. I may be talking to the person next to me. So now it's just like a concert, right? You put a bunch of people in a concert and they like go manic. You put them in a group, you add that kind of deep and intensely emotional things. You activate their empathy and their compassion. Dr. John talks about it just incredibly in his research paper. And you literally induce a hypomanic state.
And the
That's what
confession,
people remember. And
and
they're
the
like, that's transformation.
yeah, and the confession, even if it isn't in front of the large group, it's go and call somebody if you've seen something about yourself.
Oh,
But
yes.
then this confession spreads out into the world, into the relationships, and people get a taste of, oh, when I tell the truth, or when I say this, then this happens. And there's an effect. So the confession starts to spread all through the so-called landmark community into
Dale,
other families.
have you ever gotten one of those calls now that you're kind of on this side of the equation, now that you have distance? I got one recently. I actually got a call from a friend, a casual friend, lovely woman, and she was coaching a program. And she called to confess to me why she hadn't talked to me in the last, I don't know, handful of years, whatever. Like it never even occurred to me that she wasn't talking to me. Like because she's a very, very casual friend anyway. I talked to her like 3 times, 4 times in a span of 15 years. Like that wasn't unusual. Plus we had that whole pandemic thing. Nobody talked to anybody during the pandemic. So it wasn't a thing, but she calls with this whole confession. And it's all about some decision that she had made regarding something that I had said, blah, 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 said somewhere. It was the weirdest experience. And I thought, this is what it was like for people in my life. It was so weird and unnecessary and like strange. And
It's like, what's gone wrong? Like, what is
when it didn't have anything to do with me, that she
right,
had,
right.
and it wasn't even something that I had said or anything. I'll say what it is because it won't matter. I'm not going to reveal the person, but she's a Trump supporter and I'm not. So this is a big thing in our country now, right? So just for the world that's freaking out, we're freaking out too, don't worry. And but it's actually statistically it's a minority that are Trump supporters, but there's like this giant gulf, and there's like this foreboding, like, oh, and I'm not, and I have a handful of friends that actually are, and I love them, and we're still friends, and it's not a problem for me at all. I had another friend, tell me one time, I haven't talked to you because, and she had a thing about vaccines. She's like, I don't believe in the vaccines. I said, well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not talking to you about vaccines. Like, why would you have that be I don't understand. Like, why is that a thing? So the confession isn't even something that's out here between you and the other person quite often. It's some internal something that is going on with you. And now you're confessing it out of the blue with no context to a person who has no responsibility in that matter. I don't care who this person votes. I mean, I'm not going to vote for him, but she chooses that. And anybody who's known me for any length of time knows I'm always going to respect and honor people's choice. And except for one thing, I have one issue that I get really nasty about, and that's smoking. I don't like watching people die. So that's the only one where I'll step out and say something. But otherwise, I'm, even if I vehemently disagree, if it is not directly hurting another person or themselves, and which is why we're now having a problem with the whole Trump thing, because people are getting hurt. But anyway, we won't go there.
We won't.
So,
But I do want to share. So I didn't have a call, but so I was like a nomad afterwards. I just had to, I kept moving. It was like my dopamine hit was this constant change, like being involved in different dynamics. So I was moving house. I moved house something like 10 times in 3 years or something. It was really like I was a nomad. I just couldn't find my grounding. And I had two housemates come to me with this amazing course that they'd done, and their lives were changing. And I'm just like, don't tell me. This was like on the Monday. I didn't even know they were going
this is
into it.
after your landmark experience, like on your way
Yeah.
out? Oh,
After,
got it.
so I was completely out, and I'd
Yeah.
been like this nomad living with different people and trying to find how I fit in the world. And two guys in different houses came to me like 1 or 2 years apart. And the first one, he's like, oh, I've done this amazing course. Like they didn't tell me they were going into it, but on the Monday afterwards, and I think you should come to the evening session tomorrow night. And I'm just like, just don't. And
I
then
had a really hard time too after after the handful of folks came to me seeking help for, kind of how to handle the abuse that they were allegedly experiencing from Warner. But then I felt like all of a sudden I couldn't talk to all my landmark people because I didn't know how to talk. I didn't, in my whole community, like I felt kind of cut off. And the pandemic was a little handy for me because we were all sort of separated and cut off anyway. So it was easy to have that quiet time. I refer to the pandemic as my, it was like a forced timeout, and it was really good for me. I needed that timeout. I don't know that I would have, honestly, Dale, if Landmark had not threatened me. So the things that really broke it for me, broke the haze, if you will, was seeing that Landmark, when informed about Werner's proclivities, habits, was going to do nothing. That was heartbreaking to me. Really broke my heart. There was somebody on Brian Nord's and Eric Rojas' show last night that was talking about a letter that came out after Black Lives Matter that kind of was sort of the equivalent. It was the corporate equivalent of All Lives Matter. And this person had worked so significantly with graduates of, Black and African descent and doing these special, that broke her heart because she thought that she was accountable, that she was a leader in an organization that stood for, a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. And it literally is heartbreaking. And I don't know a single talk. This is how you get out of Landmark, honestly, Dale. One, you get sick. So most people are sick. I have an autoimmune disease. Virtually every leader or staff member that I've talked to that had spent any significant time have some sort of an illness. I didn't get out. I didn't leave because of that illness, but I was utterly exhausted. And I mean, it was definitely a contributing factor. I was incredibly overweight, utterly exhausted, but you get sick or you get heartbroken. You get your heart broken. And it can be something simple like that gentleman that somebody relayed their story the other day that was not able to go to his family's funeral. I would stake my life that when that center's division director said to that staff member, that center manager said to whoever said it to him, said, you can't go to that family funeral. That was the beginning of the end of that person's staff career. I promise you, because I've listened to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people's stories. And I used to get their story. I used to get what they had to say fully, really get it. And I would, if appropriate, I would direct them to HR or to do something about it. Just like I did the people who came to me with Werner. I'm like, well, you need to, if what you're saying is that you're being physically harmed, you need to get to safety and or call the police. Like that's what you do. That's what you do when somebody's physically harming you, right? Like, why are you asking me this? Don't we all know this? But anyway, and then I would put him back in play as I did those people for a period of time. And that was my job. That's what it was to be a wisdom course leader, which is of the consulting division, which I now know, by the way, consulting services is also what it was called, the internal people in the Scientology network that were responsible for the well-being of the leaders and the staff, which is what I was trained as a wisdom course leader. I was responsible for the well-being of the leaders, the staffs, and the graduates. So I was the internal healing network. So it's not an accident that people come to me, and and now they're coming to me because I stood up and I said, wait, this is bigger, this is wrong, and nothing's doing it. But that heartbreak, those heartbreak moments, and then usually it takes something more. So for me, it was the heartbreak, but I was still like, but I can't, if I say anything, when this new, I also knew that this information would come out. Like, there's no way. It was just, I got a call from a reporter. Like, there was no way it wasn't coming out. There were various legal actions and things like that. So it was like, this is coming. I thought it was going to come in 2021 and then 2022. And then I'm like on pins and needles and all this stuff. But then when I go to create my next project, so I've left Landmarks, I had left Landmark a while before, but now I'm not going to do this project. I'm not going to host Werner and Gang anymore. I'm now going to take what I built, hosting them, and I'm going to do something next. And I actually wanted to work with the Mission Control folks, which is a Landmark fallout. And I'm like all excited, and we're going to create continue a leadership style event, but here we're going to really feature the work of Mission Control and how do you actually take your initiatives, your ideas, your possibilities, and really put them in time and make them happen, and da-da-da-da-da. And then I get threatened by Landmark that if I do that, they're going to sue me. And if I allow people, if I put people if I use the marketing lists I had, which I had the full legal right to, by the way, minus people off of a specific list Landmark had given me, which I had purged like 6-7 years before that. Like I hadn't even, I had purged all that many, many years before. But they threatened me, broke my heart, like really broke my heart. Like that was the moment when I knew I actually wasn't family. I had thought I was kind of part of the family, especially having gotten all the way to the level where I was working with Werner. So I felt like I couldn't imagine. I remember talking to the gal who called me to warn me. She called me to tell me that I was going to be getting a call. I was going to be getting a letter from legal about, telling me to cease and desist, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, do you know who you're talking to? Like, I've been your like black ops healer, secret agent, I've been hosting the sort, like, what are you talking about? Can we talk about this? And, anyway, and she was like, this is because you are special is why you're getting a call and not just a letter.
Yeah. It's like they would never do this and they do it. It's that
Yes.
betrayal. I see that as betrayal.
Yeah, this would never happen, or this would never happen to me, which is where I was, which honestly is I'm not ashamed exactly, but kind of like, I'm like, and now I've had to reconcile. That's part of what I've had to reconcile with. Like, okay, well, but I wasn't experiencing abuse. That cost benefit. And now where I'm at is one person experiencing abuse is too many, let alone 2, 3, 4, 5. And, people say to me, I know the criticism, but they didn't go to somebody who could do something about it. Hundreds and hundreds. I could, if we had time to schedule it, we could line up at least 20 people that would come on and tell you about how they went to HR, how they went to Joan and Harry, how they went to the courts, how they went to, there's dozens and dozens. If you start looking for it, you will see dozens and dozens of suits where people went to the courts and Landmark settles because they don't ever want to get into discovery, because and the few times they have gotten into,
then it goes on the public record and people have
that's right,
something to grab onto. It's like, oh wow, that's happened.
Right.
And they continued, and that's the thing, is the knowingly continuing that behavior.
Well, they've made an evaluation. I mean, I literally talked to somebody who was in the room when conversations were had. In a cost benefit analysis, the cost of the lawsuits was still less than, and these were regarding employment issues. The cost of the lawsuit is less than paying people and managing the employment practices. Now, that doesn't mean that they haven't made attempts from time to time to handle the bad employment practices. Not paying people overtime, insisting that people clock off and then volunteer, not paying people, not providing breaks, not, you know, these are all things I can show. I have complaints, actually, legal filed complaints, that 10, 15 violations, employment violations, and several of them. Again, it's the same violations over and over and over and over. And I remember, I think you even talked about it. I remember different times where policies get made. People have to take their breaks. But you know what's
Have to
louder
take
than
a weekend off. That came through. Like what
Oh,
they
yeah.
shared with me about TMLP. I would leave work at 10 p.m., catch the red-eye flight to Sydney or Melbourne the following day, arrive. There's a 3-hour time break. I would arrive at 6 a.m., go to breakfast and get ready for the conference Saturday, Sunday, leave Sunday night and come back to work on Monday. And then they said, okay, so we make it a compulsory that you have to take a weekend off once a month. You have to have a whole weekend.
I had that scheduled. And then they have, but what's
But
louder,
stick to it, like nobody did.
ever, because what's louder, yeah, well, because what's louder is you got to produce this result. And if you don't produce that result, there is hell to pay. So it's an abusive cycle.
Yeah. And it's like it's on, you're coming back, like you're breaking this rule. Okay, you want to do it, you do it.
We'll figure out how to. I've heard from a number of people now that told me they went all the way to the top, that, you know, their center managers, their center division directors, even all the way to Joan Rosenberg, with ideas for how they could get their job done in 40 hours. And they were told, no, we're not going to adopt that. We're not going to adopt that. We're not going to adopt this. This is the way it is. We are an army for transformation. And this is like being in the army. And if you need to go to battle, you need to come to work like you're going to battle every day. You know what? You do not need to battle for transformation.
No,
that's like contradictory.
Yeah. And also the war, it's like it's a war. That the framework that it's coming from is it's a militant, and it's also keeping people in that environment. The chances that people leave that environment, then the intensity dilutes, and there's a risk when there's a dilution of the intensity that people could start to sway or hear other points of view, which is really dangerous territory for Landmark.
And the belief, that's why I question the cult thing, because the belief at the Rosenberg level, which is the head of the family, is that beating people up for results is the only way you get results. I mean, like, you could put them on a lie detector test and they would totally pass. That is how you produce results, is that you create that kind of, you foment a crisis. You probably weren't around when we had to go through this whole document endlessly, but I'll never forget the part of, to produce a result, you have to foment a crisis.
Oh, right.
And I've literally studied collaboration and say that's while crises do create miraculous moments and result, there's a whole thing behind that, why that happens. But it turns out you actually don't have to create the crisis. You can also create a possibility. But see, they have both. You got to have the crisis to get to the possibility. The possibility then pulls for the action. And then when the action slows down, create a crisis to create a new possibility, to create action. When the action slows down, create a crisis. It's a cycle. And it doesn't exist in Landmark. I mean, this isn't, let's not.
No, this is happening worldwide right now. This is happening right now with Ukraine, Israel. It's creating a crisis. It's actually the easiest way, because to pull something down is easier than risking building something new and fresh. That's a much more challenging way for humans to live. The crisis way, the war, that's easy.
So I actually have an open question about, I love living in questions. I actually have a question about that. I don't know that it's easier. I think it's habitual. I think as a society, we're habituated to that. And so therefore familiar is always easier, right? Like familiar feels easier. Like my brain, remembers how to walk. So it's easier. And I mean, we're hearing this right now in the US thing. And sorry, this is such a big thing in our lives right now, especially this week.
It's affecting Western culture. It's not just the US. It's not just the US, Anne. This is Western culture. This is also the Commonwealth, England, Australia. It's English-speaking countries. It's affecting the rest of the world.
We're hearing we did it before, so we can do it again, except for circumstances have completely changed. The world has changed since you did it.
Here's the thing, it's a really passionate subject. But
I know.
The reason I say it's easier is because the foundations are already in place. That's what's easier, right?
Brilliant.
Yeah. The foundations are already there. It's just
like the bridge is already built.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. The systems the
in
systems, the
place,
structures that
which is
hold.
landmark. They're choosing the easy way just to continue doing what they're doing, churning and burning, because to really alter this structure, it's going to take a lot. There's going to have to be
Okay.
calling every single person that's ever done a course. Every
Well, I
single
think it starts internally. That people
Yeah,
need to
absolutely.
retire,
There's an internal
need
awareness.
to be completely.
Yeah, and then they have to call every single person that's ever done a course and saying, we fucked up. We fucked up royally and we apologize. What is your life like? That's what it's going to take. So it's much easier for them to keep going. Much easier.
And let's to give them and we're talking about landmark. We have to talk about landmark people because that's where we have the experience. But I would say this is true in so many organizations. So in the United States, our systems do not reward accountability or responsibility. In fact, they make it dangerous and they punish it.
They
So
incentivize bad
landmark were to
behavior.
come and say I did, or any Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola,
Yep.
any big company comes and says we did these things wrong, we had it wrong, and we caused this kind of damage. The very model that we're taught to clean up our integrity, if they were to use that, they open
Yes.
themselves to enormous liability. So now that said, we have seen examples. We had a US president a long time ago who walked on a camera and said, I lied. And that person stayed in the presidency, and that person, became, lots of people hated him, had lots of fallout from that. But I'll never forget that because I remember that moment distinctly, and I wasn't really politically active or involved at that time, but I was like, whoa, did that just happen? And so it's possible, but it is so risky.
Yes.
And it's risky because we have systems, some of those systems we have in place do not. I talk about this in the book at the end because people were like, well, what should they do? And I'm like, well, clean it up. What should Werner do? Clean it up. But let's recognize we would need to grow up also. We would need to actually provide that space so that that can happen. And we need to understand, like I've had predators. I had somebody who was in a course that I led and discovered, this is one of the most inspiring people I've ever met in my life, got clear that things he had been fantasizing about, he was getting close to doing them, and they were very wrong. I'm not going to say what they are because I don't want to taint this, but very, 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 right? Illegal. Went and turned himself in, ended up going, spent a little bit of time in jail, ended up, in a halfway house, all this stuff, ended up in, took therapy, like he did all the things he had to do, but it by all external looking, it could have, and in many ways destroyed life as this person knew it. But they, at a certain point, was like, that was the price to pay. And to me, like, that's what some people have asked me, what should Werner, to me, like if Werner went on 60 Minutes and said, I have been such a fool. This way of operating, I have spent my entire lifetime hiding it, running from it, all the things, and I'm not going to die with that on my conscience. And I apologize to every person that I've ever hurt. And here's a restitution fund so that people can get the support. The stupid $4 million that they're putting into that dumb building in Cal State. I mean, that should be, in my opinion, that should be a fund for the hundreds of staff that are literally wandering around seeking healing, therapeutic healing from having been on staff or been a program leader or been at the effect of some very gone awry registration conversation. I literally just heard from somebody who wasn't on staff, wasn't a program leader, totally experienced abuse trying to register in a seminar.
It's not even about the funding. For me, it's not the funding. There's no compensation.
That's impact. It's not about funding. It's about impact.
My time, it was like 20 years. I was in a complete mess because there was nobody I could talk to. The only people were ex-Scientologists. They were the closest I could come to relating my experience of what happened. None of the world made sense. So it's not about the funding. It's about providing a support group.
Resources, for the
resources, exactly. And empowering people to find employment. Like somehow fitting in with the structures in Australia. We have certificate 3, certificate 4 in management that when I left, I didn't fit, I couldn't tick those boxes. So I couldn't actually fit there, but I had all these skills that weren't matching any environment. And it was a real financial difficulty. So
yeah,
that
I've had a similar experience as well, that and partially because I came into that, I was so darn young. I was only 26 years old. I'm now 55. But I would say when I broke, my heart was broken in 2020, and then I needed time to process and heal. And this is where the pandemic was a real blessing for me, because it did kind of give me that time. And, my husband and we had some real estate assets we were able to sell so that we could, stay afloat. We could float our lives while we did this work. And that is a huge privilege that we had that most people do not have. And that's what I mean by the resources. I don't money, but I mean money for what people do need, which is I'm about to start a therapy group. Actually, I've gotten Dr. Rachel Bernstein, who's a fabulous, fabulous family therapist and well-known cult educator and expert. And she has agreed to do a therapy group specifically for people coming out of LGATs and high control groups. And, at a very nominal cost. I've got a sponsor that's going to subsidize, so that if there are people who can't, we're actually going to be offering it for an incredibly low price. But nobody's going to be turned away for what they can or can't pay. And we've designed this whole system for that, because what I've discovered since my book came out and all these people are talking to me is there's all these people hiding out who are barely subsiding, and they can't get a job, in part because they're so emotionally and like screwed up. Like they can't. I know what this looks like. I walked through this with my daughter when she could not work because her nervous system was just crazy wired, and all that. So we're actually now, only because I can't not respond, and I have an event company and I have a sales, I have a platform. I can do it. And I, found Rachel, and Rachel agreed to do, and so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to offer that, for as many people as want it. And
so you say more, Anne, about that, because I realize, my little intro is ending on a high note. So I thought if we could end each interview on a high note, where can people, what is the name of this group? And also I have a question that kind of fits with your heartbreak is, can you call this group some aftercare for Landmark? Are you allowed to use that terminology? So
no.
okay.
So
more about this group, please.
Well, so, and I really, through this process, so I had started my company Illuminate Life, which I'll make sure you have the spelling in the link for, but I had started my company Illuminate before all this. And I had a whole idea for creating a place where practitioners of programs, products, and services that enhance human wellness could gather. Small practitioners could kind of gather and collaborate and work together, and we could do summits that are a compilation. I'm very, very passionate about collaboration. I actually initially wanted to include Landmark because I thought Landmark was so great. Now I would not let them on my platform, but so I've now kind of altered that, and we're actually creating it as a safe place for lifelong learners. And we're taking our time. Right now, we're just building, building a list, and we do have a few offerings. And the offerings that we're offering now are very aimed at healing, because we're just seeing that there's just this giant, giant need. And I had access and opportunity. One of the things my coach keeps telling me, she said, instead of imagining something and then forcing it, why don't you see what's showing up being asked of you? And so when I stopped and look, what's being asked of me is to provide healing spaces. So anybody who signs up to be on the Illuminate newsletter is going to hear about everything that we're creating as we move towards developing a marketplace for the safe and ethical practice of personal development and wellness, programs, products, and services. And there's going to be a vetting process. I'm putting together a team. It's going to take us time. Right now, we have a few little things. We have a Facebook group where we're just discussing and learning all about high control groups. Like we're getting cult educated, and or culty educated, high control, the whole field. Not because we want to stop participating or even stop learning. It's because we want to see what's dangerous and what's not. I mean, it's the most basic thing that I personally had never applied to my personal development. I really hadn't. I mean, I know like the worst. Like if I saw somebody punch somebody in the front of a room, I'd be like, get it. But apparently, hitting them in the back of the room wasn't, I didn't know that was happening. So anyway, and I'm partnering with Seek Safely. which is a fantastic organization that this amazing family, the Browns, set up after their daughter died at a spiritual warrior camp, at an ill-run sweat lodge, hot house, and not indigenously sourced, not with no training, without the appropriate understanding of that. And 4 people died, including their daughter. And they got committed to, and as they went through their process and the court cases and all that, they started to see, both of them are therapists and social workers, and they saw there was this whole industry called coaching and personal development, self-help, totally unregulated, complete wild, wild west. And so when I met Ginny Brown and Jean Brown and George Brown, like the family, I was like, oh my God, I'm in for them. Put me to work, put me in team. So I'm passionate about that. And I honestly will spend the rest of my life, the rest of my professional life for sure, dedicating my resources, my know-how, my skill set to the forwarding of the safe and ethical practice of personal development. And look, if Landmark wanted to get their crap together, if they wanted to know how to do that, call me up. Mick, I'd have a conversation with you and I'd tell you, I don't think you'd like the answer, but what that looks like. And, you know, we're launching.
And look, I think that there's not a, I don't think there's a possibility of Landmark connecting with you to go further with that.
I don't think there is either.
The way I think it will work, the way I think it will have them possibly wake up, it's competing. Like actually providing the thing that they say that they're doing by having not a concern, but a pathway for people to live without their services. That's where it will work. So there's no need for them to want to join. But I think it'll be all the rejects. You know, we have the reject shop here in Australia where all the broken things get put into a shop.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're really popular because I can relate to being a reject. Yeah. So where the rejected ones are the ones that are going to turn this ship around. And
Dale, only if they're willing to look also.
Absolutely.
Have to, and you've done that. I mean, I was so excited when I found your interview with Chris Shelton. I couldn't believe it. I was just blown away. And but you know, this was clearly somebody who's like doing the thinking, you know, because we can get rejected and then go on and perpetrate the same crimes. Absolutely. And I know many people that are doing that.
Well, that's where I think, you know, you spoke about victimhood in one of our previous interviews. And that's where I think that's a danger zone because people just so totally settle into that. And that's where actually, you know, the training of Landmark has had me be able to grow through it because I was a victim. I had all of the
well, you don't know about the other side of the hand. Victimhood is this side, creator is this. So, but we can't get to creator without also by denying where we have been victimized. In fact, if you look, almost all extraordinary things that get created are the offspring of some terrible situation. So George,
absolutely,
their daughter dies in a self-development camp, and she died, by the way, because this ties to what you wanted to talk about today, which we didn't quite get to the consent stuff, but we will someday. But she died in part because she couldn't get out, Dale. They had a zero refund policy. It's a sunk cost fallacy. So she had invested, she couldn't get her money back. She actually was Kirby, is her name. This Sweet Life it's an incredible book. I'm going to also give you my website, isthisoccultbook.com, because that's where I've put a lot of resources, like that kind of, if you want to follow my path, the books that I've read, the podcasts that we're talking about, all this, it's all on there. And but that's about this side of the hand. That's about understanding, yes, I was victimized. I was exploited. I was da-da-da-da-da. But that makes me the absolute perfect person to create a system, to create a process, to create a conversation where exploitation in those ways are never more. And it's the two go together. And that's what I think is so powerful. And there are people that sort of naturally find that. And there are people who get stuck just on this side and they get stuck in that victim place. They don't see a way out.
Yes.
You know, but once they do, they're going to be a creator.
That's right. Finding the exit is really, really, really important. We need to know where the exit is.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because
And
there's a
as
temporary.
practitioners, we need to create exits. So I just launched a course called Safe Practitioner Workshop. People can actually still join that, even though we've done 3 sessions. We set it up so people could join at any time, and we'll keep doing it, and we'll create a community. We are already creating a community of practitioners that are committed to, wait, what does it look like to be a safe practitioner? And this is one of the very things we talked about, is you've got to have your offers have to always have a way out, and it needs to be clear and simply stated. And it has to take care of the practitioner too. I got myself very financially upside down by being overly, by taking all of the impact on myself and not putting it on not sharing it with my clients who were not living up to their end of the bargain. And so,
Lessons
you
learned.
create doorways that take care of everybody. And we're actually, I really love that little workshop. I forgot about, I had a session today. Today we talked about accuracy and what that looked like to embed that in our marketing and how we talk about ourselves and our credentials, and not how to and how to not weaponize accuracy, which is something I've seen. So we're having these conversations over at Illuminate Life for this future, for a future for the safe and ethical practice, and in partnership with Seek Safely, and it's really, really, really exciting. And then I'm also setting up these healing spaces because I see there's just a giant, giant need. And then the learning space, is this a cult book? There's books, there's resources, there's links, there's all that.
So ending on a high note, that's where we can really be grateful for the experience with Landmark, because without it, then this future wouldn't exist. I think this is what people are really drawn to with Landmark.
Yeah.
It's this opportunity to actually transform, to grow, to mature, to be able to have mature conversations. And I know that's what drew me to it. It's like I'd never been in a room and heard this quality of conversation before, ever. I didn't know it existed. And once I had a taste of it, then I was hooked. The drug dealer, supply demand, that fit for me.
What's so funny? The only other place that I had heard that level of conversation, I've now heard it in a whole variety of, including spiritual schools. But then, the only other place I'd ever heard that level of conversation was when a friend of mine who had an addiction problem got clean and started taking me to her AA and NA meetings with her. It was the only other place I'd actually really heard like deep conversation talking about, something other than weather and football, right? Like kind of beyond the social niceties. Now I understand there's academics, there's a lot of groups.
I wonder, is this a result of groups like Landmark that have filtered that through into their professions? That's what I wonder. Or have
I don't think so, because I think Landmark's more a product of them. So, AA and those kind of groups, they were around long before Landmark. There's a lot as I'm studying the lineage of even where Werner got his ideas, there's really, really a deep history. It goes back to the spiritualism of the
century of self. There's a document.
But self-development really started in the late as a response to the Depression. I have a really fabulous article that a man by the name of John Patterson, who's part of our group, just wrote, where he really did the research and looked at this. Where did the concept of self-development really begin? I can't remember the book. If I could remember it, you'd all know it. I don't think it's Napoleon Hill's, but it's somebody's very famous book. And it was one of the first people that was like, no, you can, move yourself through these spaces. Before that, you needed a priest or a spiritual leader to move you. You needed somebody who had the authority of God to move you. But then in response to the Depression era in the United States anyway, there may have been other, I haven't studied in other countries, but then that was the first place where we were saying, no, you can move yourself. You don't need authority of another, except for Werner Erhard, L. Ron Hubbard, so that everybody tries to step in and take that authority spot because that's how you make the money.
Yeah.
So it's just human nature.
A documentary called The Century of Self, which covers it as well. It looks into the history, so that's also worth having a look at. But on that high note, it's time. Again, I know we could talk for hours, and we didn't really stay true to we did. We covered quite a bit of it, the way out, the exit. We covered that quite a bit. There's still so
way in, way out, the good side, the values and I don't have any regrets. And it hasn't always been easy, including, it was very very difficult for me to speak up publicly because I didn't want to hurt my friends and I didn't want to, but there was enough in a cost benefit analysis, the hurt that was happening unabated. And then little did I know, since it's come out, I found out that it's much, much deeper. And I'm like, oh, no wonder I was so compelled to speak up so that others could speak up too. So, and give voice to this. And what Landmark chooses to do with it, that's up to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't have any axe to grind in this game, and hopefully, yeah, all these other practitioners I'm working with, though, it's very, very exciting. This group, we have 40 of us in this inaugural class of Safe Practitioner Workshop. And, we're creating a movement for the safe and ethical practice of self-development. It's coming, the Seek Safely movement.
And it's really needed. It is really.
And it's time has come. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, we can continue next week. I want to hear more about your personal growth moments, like the pivotal points where something happened. And you touched on one around the wisdom course where you saw where the guy that created the course said, well, Anne, you're meant to fail. That's like that's right. Moment. It's like, oh, wow, I can make a shift here. I can change. So I want to touch more on those.
Okay, I'll think about it. There's another one around Hotel Katrina. I'll make notes where I really feel like I saw what it was all for. And honestly, sitting in a course, I was sitting in my wisdom course, which I kind of thought was sort of a stupid course. But then this conversation happens about how do you take something from possibility to reality. And I literally turned to the person next to me who is still to this day a very, very dear friend. And I said, I'm supposed to be a wisdom course leader, which nobody was more shocked by that coming out of my mouth than me, because I kind of thought it was sort of a silly course. So, but I knew that.
I want to touch on what was it that shifted, like, because it's that dopamine hit thing. Some of these shifts have a more permanent, it's kind of like coming home.
That wasn't a dopamine hit. That's why I think it's more permanent. It wasn't a dopamine.
That's what I want to touch on.
Okay, well, we'll leave that as a teaser.
Yeah, awesome, beautiful. So
it ties to Hotel Katrina, by the way, when it gets answered why that happened. So
okay, beautiful. That's great. And we'll leave you on a high note. I'm really excited to talk to you again. So we'll do that in a couple.
Thank you, Dale. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good night, everyone.